Okay, in this video you're going to learn and watch how to build a small table. This is the last project in your intermediate shop class. It's going to use all of the tools, including the miter saw, in order to build this project. You will see everything out here on the table that you need for this. You're going to need the drill and impact driver. You're going to need pocket hole screws and the Kreg tool. You're going to need the shortest screws in order to attach the top and the shelf. You're going to need wood clamps in order to build the legs. You're going to need bar clamps in order to attach the cross braces to the legs. You're also going to need glue, pre-drill bits, and tape measure pencil and speed square to do everything. Now I've already pre-cut everything on the miter saw into my separate piles. I've got 30-inch pieces for the legs. I've got 25-inch pieces for the top. I have 20-inch pieces for the cross braces, and I have 20-inch pieces for the lower shelf. All this is cut on the miter saw beforehand. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take and find the middle of our legs and our cross braces, is so that we can cut them on the saws. There's two options for cutting them on the saw. You can cut them on the bandsaw, or they can be cut on the table saw by your teacher. So what we got to do is we have to find the middle of this board right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from one side and measure. This is a 1x6, so its actual measurement is 5.5 inches wide. So half of 5.5 is 2 3/4. We're going to go ahead and put a mark at 2 3/4. We're going to do that on both ends. If you'll notice, I'm measuring from the same side over on each one. I'm not flipping from side to side. It's always going to be the same side. I'm then going to take another board that is the same length or longer, which will allow me to draw my straight lines down the middle. You must do this on all of your pieces. When you're done, it should look something like that. Now we need to continue to do this for all of the legs and all of the cross braces. Now that we've done our legs, we're going to go ahead and do our 4 cross brace pieces. And I'm going to go ahead and use one of my tops in order to mark the halfway point on this as well. Again, everything's the same, so the halfway point is always going to be 2 3/4 of an inch. And I find that when I'm lining this up to make my mark, it's easier for me to start away from me and pull the pencil towards myself. It gives me a cleaner mark. Now that we have everything marked, we're going to go over and show you how to cut one of these in half on the bandsaw, just like you would do when you were doing your serving tray sides and handles in the project before this. Next step is you're going to take your legs and your cross braces, you're going to bring them over to the Kreg tool, and you're going to put some holes in them. On your legs, you're going to put 2 holes, 2 inches from each end, making sure that you're putting the cut edge from where you cut against the surface of the fence of the Kreg tool. On the cross braces, you're going to put your holes on the ends here. On 4 of them, they will be right in the middle. Okay? On the other 4, they will be offset to one side. Just make sure nothing is hitting each other when you put it all together and all the screws go in the right spot. At this point, we have all our pieces cut and everything is ran through the Kreg hole machine, and so we're ready to go ahead and start assembling our pieces. What we're going to do is we're going to take our leg pieces. We have 4 that have pocket holes in them, 2 inches from each end. We have 4 that have no pocket holes in them. Making sure that our pocket hole pieces are together, this is where we're going to glue and pocket hole everything together. You're going to use wood clamps in order to do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of glue on one surface of your legs. Okay. Remember, we always kind of smear it around a little bit with our fingers to make a good contact point. You should have a complete coverage of glue on the entire thing. You're then going to take your pieces and we're going to go ahead and clamp them together. One thing that you want to make sure and do when you're clamping this together with your wood clamps is you want to keep the ends even right here, and you want to keep the back side even as well. I like to put my clamps right on the end. Okay, it helps me keep everything in line better that way. One of the tricks to using these wooden clamps is that you try to keep these pieces right here as parallel to one another as possible. That prevents everything from shifting. Now I'm going to spin this around on this table that I'm working on because the surface on the edge of this table is exactly straight and level. It'll help me make sure that I've got everything where I need it to be. Now one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and check the bottom side. Okay, this side on this end here did not get exactly where I needed it to be, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen it up. And I'm going to make sure that it's nice and level on the bottom. Okay, I'm checking that with my finger. You can't see that, but that is what I'm doing. Now, if you'll notice right here, you're going to see a little bit of a gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a third wooden clamp. And because there is no pocket hole screw here, this clamp is going to stay on here for overnight to make sure that the glue dries and everything is in place where it needs to be. Okay, if you'll see here, hopefully this camera shows it, you'll see where that gap is all taken up. Now, again, we're using the pocket hole bit, so it's the longer bit. We're using the brass screws. It's important to remember that you do not want to put these in too far. They will strip out inside of the hole. That's all it takes right there. You need to be careful. Also, because you can put these screws in too far and they will stick out the back side of the hole and they will cause a point where you could have problems later on. Always double check the back side over here. Okay, for example, this one right here is sticking out just a little bit. I'm going to back it off just because I don't want to touch my finger on it later. Now I'm going to leave this middle clamp on, but I'm going to take these two end ones off. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. And I'm going to repeat this process for all four legs. Another way to build these legs, instead of building them straight out in front of you, is to build them right on the edge of the table. Go ahead and put this bar clamp underneath and demonstrate that. So notice right there, I had a little bit of a mistake, but I checked it before I was done, so I fixed it right away. If you wait until the glue dries, you will never be able to get this leg apart, and then you will have to fix it on the back end of this. At this point, you've got all four of your legs built, and they are clamped. It should look something like this when you are said and done with this part of the build. At this point, you are going to want to make sure and clean up all of your glue to make your finish on your table look 100% better. You're also going to have to wait till overnight in order to let these dry with the glue to make sure that everything bonds very well. The next day when you come back, you will see how you're going to build your H braces as well as your box, and then put the top and the shelf on. Okay. You can keep rolling. It's important when you're cleaning up glue to use some of the rags that I have around the shop. Okay, that's the best way to do it. You also want to make sure and clean up both sides. Okay, so I'm coming back and I'm cleaning up everything. A little bit of water on the rag will make sure the glue cleans up very nice. It's a lot easier to do it now than it is later. You're going to do that on all of your pieces. Now there's also something that you can do while you're waiting for your leg pieces to dry in order to make a much nicer product. You can go ahead and pre-sand your top and your shelf with the sanding blocks in order to get a better surface when it's all a completed project. You can also spend some time on your legs once they are dry, sanding them before they are created into part of the table. This will ensure the best possible product that you can come up with. All right, this is day 2 of building your table project. Off camera, I've taken a lot of time and already sanded my legs and made sure these ends were all the same length and they were all the same length with each other. I used a block sander to make sure that these were nice and clean all the way around. We're going to start by making our H braces. This is the same step that's outlined in your project planner and your build sheet. So we're going to take 2 legs. And we're going to make sure that when we do this, we take our 2 legs with the pocket holes pointing up. So it looks exactly like this, making sure that we know having them both in the same direction. So this one here, we're going to rotate it so they're up like this. The next thing we have to do is we're going to measure up 10 inches from what we established as the bottom. Now this 10-inch measurement will be different depending on which table you build. If you build a shorter table, it's only going to be 2 inches. This is the taller table, so it's 10 inches. We've now established that this is our bottom of our table and this is the top of our table, and we'll put our cross braces in. One cross brace is going to go even with the top. One cross brace is going to go down here on our 10-inch mark. The bottom of the cross brace is going to be on the 10-inch mark. I like to start with the cross braces that have the pocket hole in the middle, and we're going to put these in a particular way so that the cut side is facing towards the top of the table. This will ensure that when we are doing this, that the tabletop and the shelf have the smoothest surface to go on. So one of the things I'm going to do is spend a little bit of time making sure my layout is appropriate. Okay? And I got my clamps in the right spot before I get glue or pocket holes or anything out. Now you notice right now my clamps are on the far ends of everything. I'm going to move this clamp up so it's right on the brace on both of them. The other thing that I'm going to do while I'm doing this is make sure that my clamps are ready to go, okay? And that I can remove this piece relatively simply so that I can go ahead and get glue on everything. You can see I have this clamp all adjusted, ready to go. And take some time getting this nice and square. Now the reason you want this nice and square is that it will help your back side of your project turn out a lot better. One thing that you can do to check this is to take your tape measure and take a cross measurement, okay, and make sure that they're exactly the same. For example, this is 36 7/8 across this way, and it's 36 7/8 across this way, which means these 2 legs are exactly parallel to one another, okay? Now that we've got everything lined up, I'm going to go ahead and add glue and then clamp it and then put the pocket holes in. Now I like to add my glue on to the legs, not the cross braces. Okay? It's what works best for me. Now I'm going to go ahead and take this right here and I'm going to tighten this up just a little bit as I go, making sure that I'm keeping the top of my legs and cross braces nice and even, okay? Now I'm going to do the same thing down here. Again, I'm going to add a little bit of glue. And one thing you can do here to make sure and alleviate movement out of your cross braces is always make sure and spread around your glue just a little bit, not leave it in one pile. That tends to help things not move as much. Go ahead. Now here's where you got to spend a lot of extra time making sure that this is right on the money where we want our marks to be. When we go ahead and tighten up the clamp, making sure that everything is staying right where it needs to be. Now you don't want to over tighten this because what will happen is it'll try to push these cross braces up. You just want them nice and snug. Okay. Now, just to double check ourselves, we're going to go ahead and grab our tape measure, again doing the cross measurement, okay, making sure that everything is still right where it needs to be, okay, and we're still right on, so that's perfect, 36 7/8. Now I'm going to use pocket hole bits just like we did on the leg, there's pocket hole screws and a pocket hole bit. We're going to go ahead and put our pocket holes in, or pocket screws in. Again, being sure that we don't put them in too far or too tight because it will strip the hole out and then it will not hold. If you do strip this out, it's not the end of the world. You leave the pocket screw in there and then you will get a C-clamp and you will clamp this and leave the C-clamp on until the wood is dry. Okay? This is what we call an H-brace in the set of instructions. So now that we've got all the pocket holes in, we can go ahead and loosen this. We're going to take this off. Okay, we're going to set it aside and then build one more exactly the same way. Okay, now that we have two complete H-braces that look like this, okay, we're going to go ahead and do our next step, which is take these H-braces and make a box. Before I do that, I've got a little bit of glue squeeze out here in a few spots. I'm going to go ahead and clean that up. It's always easier to clean up your glue before it dries. This will help make your end product 100% better because glue does not take well to stain or types of finish. So the more you get it wiped off and cleaned up, the better your project's going to be. These are the little steps that it takes to make a product go from okay to great. Okay? And it doesn't take very long to do this, okay? To make sure that we're spending a little bit of extra time to make a good product. Now, we're going to do the same thing using our bar clamps right here to continue to make our table box. We're going to have to release these bar clamps, run them out almost as far as they will go depending on which clamps that you have. Because we're going to go ahead and take our two H-braces and put in like this. Now, we will not need to do any additional measurements here because if we set everything up right to start with, okay, our other cross brace is going to line up perfectly with this lower cross brace, and our top cross brace is going to be nice and even up here. Again, I'm starting to do my dry layout, which means I am not having any glue on anything at the moment. And so what I'm going to do right now is make sure that everything is ready to go, so that when I am ready to glue, everything's ready and easy to maneuver. Okay, you'll notice on this one I'm using the cross braces with the pocket holes offset. Okay, just a personal preference. It doesn't really matter which ones you use, but I like to use these ones second. Again, I'm going to add a little bit of glue down here. Again, make sure we smear it around just a little bit to make sure that it stays where we want it to and doesn't float on the glue. This will give us a better final product. Okay. Again, I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up just a little bit. Okay. Not too much, but just a little bit. And do the same on the bottom. We're going to go ahead and tighten this clamp up. Now, if you have an issue here, if anything's off, you want to make sure that the top edges are all the same. If it's off on the bottom, you can fix that a little bit. If it's off on the top, it'll make your shelf and your top wobbly. So you want to make sure, okay, and make sure the top's edges are all perfect. A little bit of extra time here goes a long, long ways. Now, because everything is still wet, okay, make sure and get all any glue that squeezes out off, and make sure it's a nice product. I'm going to leave these lower clamps on, and I'm going to get a second set of clamps when I do the top, but I am going to flip the whole table over to make life a lot easier. So what we're going to do is just start by standing it up like this. And we're going to get 2 clamps and set them down, and then we'll set our table down into that. Now you'll have to be careful when you're doing this. Some of our clamps are a little bit different than others, and they might not all fit on this side of the table. Now we've got this set. We're going to go ahead and flip it over like this, okay? Taking our time to make sure everything's lined up where it needs to be. Okay, now, when we're doing this, we want to remember now that the top edge is opposite from where it was the last time. So when we're doing our dry fit, we know that our top edge right here is going to be the same, and it has to be nice and tight. You notice there I moved the back side of the clamp, not the clamp portion, okay, to make sure that I have enough room when I am tightening up the clamp with the screw side of the clamp. Okay, and do the same thing down in the bottom. Okay. Making sure everything's lined up, ready to go. Once I'm happy with my dry fit, I'm going to go ahead and add the glue and the pocket hole screws. Again, if you're having a hard time down here and you're sitting, your piece is starting to push up a little bit, okay, you can loosen this off and add a C-clamp right here, but you're not necessarily going to have to do that. It all depends on how your wood comes together and how good you are at doing your dry fit. I'm going to go ahead and add my pocket hole screws. And then clean up any squeeze out that I have on any of the joints. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to leave the clamps on because at this point you will probably be done with your day of putting this together. But I'm going to leave these clamps on while the glue dries, and I'm going to show you how to put the shelf and the top on. We're going to do that right on top of the table. When you are building this on your own, you're probably going to have to do this on the ground. Okay. Your shelf pieces are 20 inches long, meaning they're the same length as your cross braces. So your shelf pieces are only going to fit in one direction. Okay? They will not fit the other ways. You'll notice here, okay, nice tight fit, that's what we want. They go this way. If you were to try to put them the other way, they're not going to fit, okay? They only go one way. Now, we're going to put our 2 side pieces on right here. And then we're going to put the one in the middle, okay? This is where we're going to have to use some measurement. We want to make sure that the distance between here and here, and here and here, or the spacing, whatever you want to call it, is exactly the same. Before I measure that, I'm going to put 1 screw on each side, 3/8 of an inch away from the end, right in the middle of the board. Now this is your 5th or 6th project at this point, so you should be able to do this relatively by eye, but if you cannot, take a measurement. Okay, take another measurement. And this will help you find out where it needs to be. 2 3/4, 3/8 of an inch. And repeat this step as many times as you need to. Doing this step also helps make a nicer product, knowing that your pieces are going to have the screws in the same exact place on all of them. Now, one of the tricks that I'm going to show you when we're putting these screws in is to go ahead and use the pocket hole bit. It'll allow you to get at a better angle for everything. So we're going to go ahead and pre-drill all of these first. Remember, we're just doing the two ends, and then we'll come back and do the one in the middle. We're going to use the short screws here. They're 1.25 inches long. They do not need to be any longer than that. They use the same size bit as our pocket hole bits, so everything should work out very well. If you notice, the longer bit allows you to use a little bit of an angle and get in there perfectly to make sure that your screws get where they need to be. Again, when you're putting your screws in, please just put them down so that they are flush. You do not have to drive them all the way through the board. There are two ways that you can determine the correct spacing for right here. The first way is to slide your board all the way to one side, take a measurement of the space between the two boards, in this case 5 inches, and you're going to be able to divide that by 2 to give you a 2.5 inch space here and a 2.5 inch space here. 2.5 plus 2.5 equals 5. The other way to do it is to eyeball your board where it needs to be, okay, and then measure your distances on each side and keep moving it. I prefer the first method because it allows me to do this, which is to put a mark at 2.5 inches. I'm going to put it on this side because this is the side I'm working on. At 2.5 inches on both sides. And this will allow me to line up this board on my marks right here. Okay? Now, I know that the spacing here and the spacing here is exactly the same because of my math. Okay? One of the things that might help here is we're going to go ahead and show a different method for pre-drilling instead of doing it right on there. We're going to take it off, okay, and we're going to pre-drill right here. Please use all safety precautions, including clamping this piece to your table. Even though it is not demonstrated here, it is the safest way to do that. And then we're going to go ahead and line it up again. Another thing that you can do is you can go ahead and glue these pieces with a little bit of glue as well, but I prefer not to, just because I don't know what this table is going to be used for in the future. Now on this center one here, I'm going to go ahead and switch bits and do our standard short bit. Always make sure that you have your spots where they need to be. Now the last thing we're going to do is put the top on. I personally prefer to run the top the opposite direction of the shelf. It really does not matter which direction you put it, but I find this more aesthetically pleasing than going the other way. So that is going to be the demonstration that I do. There's nothing saying that you can't turn these and go the same way as the shelf and go this way. Okay? I just find aesthetically that I like it better the other direction. Now, when putting the top on, it's going to require that you do a little bit of thinking on how we're going to get this straight. Remember, our top pieces are 25 inches long. Our box is only 23 inches from outside to outside, which means there should be 1 inch of an overhang on each end. Okay? The other thing you need to know is that wood expands and contracts. So you do not want to put your top where it's really tight like this because it'll expand and contract differently than the legs and the rest of the structure. So we want to go ahead and provide spaces here. For me, I like to use a speed square in order to do my spaces. So it looks like this. Okay? My speed square, using a tape measure, provides roughly a 1/4 inch gap between each board. Most of your orange speed squares in the shop will also provide the same 1/4 inch gap. So you can either go get 2 speed squares and put on here, or 3 speed squares and put in here so that you can move this around to get your right space, or you can figure out your spacing before that. I'm going to show you the 2 speed square method, or 3 speed square method, because it is probably going to be the best, and I will demonstrate that with 3 orange speed squares. You guys have to cut it there. Okay, I've got 3 identical orange speed squares out of the tool room. I've gone ahead and laid them in there and lined them up like this. Okay, so what I'm going to do with my tape measure now is I'm going to measure the distance across the top, which in this case is, don't want anything to move on us now, so we're going to go as close to those orange speed squares as possible, is 22 5/8. Our measurement across here is 21 1/2, which means we're going to have basically a 1/2 inch gap on each side this way and an inch gap on each side this way. Okay? Now that we know that, we want to make sure and line this up. So we're going to have, well, let's do our measurements here. So we have 22 1/2 or 21 1/2, and this is 22 5/16, so that's an inch, or excuse me, 5/8, so that's an inch, so that's a 1/2 inch plus a 16th, which is 9/16 of an overhang on this edge and an inch overhang on this edge. This is where the little bit of time that you take to do this the right way is going to be perfect. So I'm not going to worry about the rest of this right now. I'm going to worry about this one board right here. Okay, I'm going to pull it to my 9/16 overhang here and my 9/16 overhang here. And I'm going to make sure I have my inch overhang here. And I'm going to double check and triple check all of my measurements before I put my first board in to make sure that it's exactly where I want it to be. Another trick that you can do here is you can mark this in several spots to make sure that your marks line back up. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a mark where my cross brace is up here and right here. Okay, and then I'm going to take this board down after I put a couple marks underneath the bottom like this, and here, and here, and then I'm going to drill this on the table. Okay, I can use my speed square to do this, or I can do a quick measurement. I'm going to show you my speed square method. So we're going to come over here. We know that the half of this is 2 3/4, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Okay, and we're going to put it right there. Same thing over here. We're going to put our mark where we need to be, which is right here. And then I'm going to put a little T for 2 3/4. I'm going to go ahead and take my drill, and I'm going to pre-drill this on the table. Again, making sure that I clamp this down. Now what this is going to allow me to do, now that I have my marks here and here, is when I put this back on here, I can just line my marks back up. I do not need to worry about whether or not my measurements are right because I marked everything. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my 2 screws and put in the table. Now my first top piece is done. Now, because I did my measurements beforehand, I know that all my spacing is going to be good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and line up my orange braces here in the middle, and I'm just going to worry about making sure that these surfaces right here are exactly the same as we go down. All right? And that's going to make sure that everything is lined up exactly where it needs to be. I'm going to drill one side, and then I'm going to come back and drill the other side because I'm on top of the table. That'll allow me to, or I will move this around so that I can make sure and see exactly where things are supposed to be. Now I'm going to go ahead and use my speed square to help me make sure I know where everything is supposed to be. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm lining up everything, making sure that the spacing across here is exactly the same. Okay, nice and tight. I'm going to put a mark on my top where the center of the cross brace goes through, and then I'm going to use my other speed square, or I can take one of these out, and I'm going to go ahead and mark it. Okay, again, line it up, 2 3/4, put a mark and a T, 2 3/4, put put a mark and a T, and 2 3/4, and put a mark and a T. This is up close of what the mark and the T looks like. It shows the middle of the board and the 2 3/4. So I'm going to pre-drill that right there. Again, I'm going to show you this, pre-drilling it on the table, just to make life easier for me at this point. I'm going to pre-drill all 3 of them at the same time. And then put them back up where they need to go, and add back in my spacers. Okay, now that I got my spacers back in, I'm going to go ahead and realign this. I can take my speed square and use it as a straight edge to go ahead and go through here. This is where it takes a little bit of time to make sure you have a good product, make sure everything is lined up where it needs to be. When you first learned how to use a impact drill and driver, you learn how to set your screws in like this. This will help you keep everything nice and aligned, because then you can use your other hand to help hold the board in place. Now, because this is up here on the table, I'm just going to go ahead and turn this around. If it was on the floor, you could just walk to the other side. Okay. Again, my pieces are up here. I'm going to go ahead and mark and drill these ones in place. I'm going to go ahead and put my marks. Okay. Line it up. Come to 2 3/4. Make my T. I'm going to go ahead and drill these. And then add my last 3 screws. I'm going to start on the side that I did first and make sure my pieces are pulled tight to where they need to be. Okay, snug. It's perfect. You do not need to pull them so tight that you cannot get out your spacers. Last thing we're going to do is go ahead and pop these out. Notice how nice and easy they come out. That means they were not on there too tight. If I tip this up this way, you'll be able to see that they are spaced evenly across the board. Now, your table is completely built at this point. What you will want to do is take the block hand sanders and go ahead and sand the top and the bottom like this. Another thing that you can do is pre-sand all of these and then put it together so your sanding is done before it is finished. You'll want to make sure that everything is nice and smooth, any pencil marks are all sanded off, and then you will be able to finish your table. I'm leaving the clamps on here because my glue is still wet. However, when you are building your table, you should be able to take these clamps off after you get everything built and wait a day. You'll probably need 3 days of putting this together if you work consistently every single day. That's how you build a table at Frontier Middle School.